Marvel's Deadpool VR. How good is it really? And should you play it? Let's dive right into it. Now, Marvel's Deadpool VR is a first-person action-adventure game that takes the fast-paced combat in virtual reality to the absolute next level. But first and foremost, it is important to know that this game is a meta exclusive, and that means that you can only play it on the Quest 3 or the Quest 3S. And while your experience might slightly differ depending on the headset that you use, we will go into more detail about those changes later on in this review. Because let's first get started with the overall gameplay itself. Now keep in mind that most of the footage that you can see on screen during this review will be from early on in the game. And this is mainly done to prevent any major spoilers, of course, for those who haven't played it yet. But when it comes to that gameplay, basically from the first second that you jump into it to the very last minute, you will be fighting your way across its levels in this overall very intense action-packed experience. And that can go all the way from driving a jeep into a helicopter in just its opening scenes, to fighting against jetpack-powered enemies with a sniper rifle in the next one. And since this game is so much focused on the combat, it means that you can expect to find, upgrade, and wield a wide range of weapons during your playthrough. With the game also rewarding you big time for creativity, as well as for the stylishness of how you take down your enemies. Although, at the very beginning though, you will simply just start off with your trusty guns on your hips and your dual katanas on your back. But don't worry, you will also quickly add some new ones to this during the prologue, such as a fancy looking grenade and much more. Now, it is also good to know that these base weapons come with infinite ammo and they're instant respawns after you throw them. So this kind of guarantees you that you will always have some tools at your disposal whenever you need them, even if you've emptied out the clips of some of the more hardcore weapons you find lying around. And secondly, you will also be doing your fair share of traversals in here that can go from using your grappling hook to walking on walls or even sliding across the floor. And story-wise, to summarize it without spoiling it, you will be contracted by the so-called Mojo, who will send you out to take down some well-known villains from the Marvel universe. But with some twist that almost turn it into a popularity contest. However, while some of these levels do have branching paths for you to discover, or different optional ways to open up, the overall experience here is pretty linear, with a clear start and end to each chapter. And besides that, if you feel like the combat is a bit too easy during your gameplay, then you can luckily also change up the difficulty mode in settings whenever you want. But if this is your first playthrough, then sticking to that normal one should be just fine. However, next to all the fighting, we should also talk about the graphics and performance. Because probably the first thing that you noticed is that this game makes use of some unique cel-shaded graphics that almost look like it comes straight out of a comic book. And that, of course, fits perfectly with a title like Deadpool. Now do keep in mind though, that since this game was specifically made to work on the Meta Quest 3 and 3S, that the details won't be on par with something like a PC VR game. But it is also thanks to that previously mentioned cel-shaded style that you don't really notice this as a problem at all. And performance-wise, it managed to keep up a pretty stable frame rate throughout, even while recording at the same time. So honestly, the developers behind it, known as Twisted Pixel, did manage to make a pretty good looking game that seems to run smoothly from start to finish. But perhaps one of its biggest pros that we should talk about is of course the voice acting. Because in here, none other than Neil Patrick Harris is doing the voice of Deadpool. And that means that you'll get hundreds of puns and jokes that will be made nearly every minute. But best of all, these dialogues can actually change depending on your own actions in game. So that can often give you that typical fourth wall breaking situation that you come to expect from Deadpool. But besides this, there is also the option to choose either subtitles or download completely different voiceovers if English is not your first language. So no matter where you're from, you should be good to go here. But we should also talk about some downside regarding this game. For example, when it comes to the comfort, since while this experience can definitely be classified as one of the most intense ones that are out there on Quest, I was surprised myself that I started to get slightly motion sick while playing it. Now luckily, directly from the start of the game, you'll be prompted to choose between one of the comfort levels from some preset profiles, and that goes from newbie to absolute hero. But even on my medium settings, which are called VR Curious, I noticed that I quite quickly had to turn it down to that newbie back again. Which for me personally doesn't happen that often. Although, one thing I do really appreciate here is that you can also customize your settings quite a lot from within this menu, that goes from changing up your turning styles to vignettes and even the forward movement. And with each of these categories individually, you can also crank it up or lower these parameters however you see fit. Either way though, even on the newbie settings, I do think that if you are completely new to VR, that this might be a bit too much to start off with. And in that case, it might be worth to try out some calmer games first. And the second thing that is definitely worth mentioning here is the M rating for mature. Because as you might already be familiar with when it comes to the movies and the Marvel universe itself, the combat and cutscenes in here can get pretty brutal to say the least. And while the cartoon-like style does make it look a little bit less serious, I do think that it can sometimes feel a bit much, making that M rating definitely reasonable. However though, a nice addition from the developers here is that they have also made a kid pool mode, which takes out most of these parts as well as these swear words and then replaces them with some funny alternatives instead. But I will let you discover that one for yourself. So moving on, we get to the replayability. Now while a linear game might sound like a one and done experience, you can actually unlock a bunch of skins, characters and secrets throughout the entire campaign that can change up your overall gameplay quite a lot. And that goes from new voice lines to even a bunch of Easter eggs for those hardcore players to discover. But I personally love the attention to detail here the most, with for example the fourth wall breaking dialogue changes that happen when you replay the game even with your normal base skin. So if you enjoyed your first playthrough, you can be sure that you come back for more quite often. But we should probably also talk about some bugs and glitches. Now luckily during my playthrough, I didn't experience many problems that would lead to any game-breaking situations or forced restarts. Now the only small problem that I did come across is that sometimes my arms were taken in a strange position as if the controller was kind of glitching out. But one menu pause and then clicking on resume game pretty much fixed this instantly. Now of course, besides all this, we should also talk about maybe the most important part of all. And that is the price. Because Marvel's Deadpool VR is releasing for a total of $49 on the Horizon store page. And this is definitely on the higher side compared to most of the other VR titles that are out there. But luckily though, Meta does often have some nice sales going on. So I'll make sure to leave a link to the game itself, as well as some nice discount codes whenever they are available in the description below. So in that way, you can at least save yourself some money whenever that is possible. But we should also quickly talk about the headset differences, since this game is exclusive for the Quest 3S and Quest 3. So that means that anyone who has an original Quest 2 sadly is not getting this game at all. And while the performance between the Quest 3S and Quest 3 is pretty much identical, since it uses the same Snapdragon XR2 Gen 2 chip, the resolution does look slightly higher on that of Quest 3, thanks to their higher pixel density screen and newer pancake lenses. So that might be something you want to keep in mind. But of course, gameplay-wise, each title has the exact same amount of content, no matter on what headset you play it. Oh yeah, and the game is also at least 34GB in size, so you might have to free up some space before you install it. But that gets us to the final conclusion. Now Marvel's Deadpool VR brings the popular anti-hero for the first time into virtual reality in an action-packed experience that isn't for the faint of heart. And thanks to its sleek-looking cel-shaded graphics and funny punchlines around each corner, I think that all-time fans will more than enjoy this game. Although, for newcomers to VR, the gameplay itself might be a bit more on the intense side. Either way, if you are a big Marvel fan, or if you truly love those intensive combat experiences, then you will feel right at home here. But that is not all, because there are also a lot of awesome free VR games that you can play on your Meta Quest 3. So click on the video that you see on screen right now to make sure you don't miss out on that. And of course, stay awesome.